Good news can often get overlooked or buried by the negative in our everyday lives, so let's change that. I'm Adrianna.
And I'm Wyatt.
We're just two ordinary people without any special qualifications or anything, trying to navigate life. We invite you to join us as we share wholesome stories, news articles of hope, and ideas about how we can all make the world just a little bit brighter. We are uplifting positive stories. Welcome back to another episode of Uplifting Positive Stories. We're so glad you've joined us.
It's going to be back again.
So today's episode is a little bit of a heavier topic, but I feel like it's a really positive one and a very powerful one when you really think about it. This one is all about how people can change and all about getting rid of our negative feelings that we might have towards people of our past and lightening that load up for ourselves so that we can have a more positive view of our future and the people in it. So yeah, I feel like it's got some very powerful stories that I've found from these threads that I've been searching, as well as a very, very powerful news article that I'm looking forward to diving into.
Yeah.
The first story we're going to be reading today is from the thread Faith in Humanity. I have covered this one before on the podcast, but this one is a very powerful story.
I feel like this thread fits the theme already, just faith in humanity and the idea of people changing.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny, both stories actually have very, very similar titles and very similar things that happen in them. So this one says, the title is just simply People Change, period. This story says, I was bullied a lot in secondary school, 11 to 18 years old, for people who have different school systems. There was one main culprit, let's call him C. Over many years, this boy spit on me, tried to break my arm, and verbally abused every day. This went on for a long time. Eventually, we left school. No idea what he went on to do. I think it was construction. Many years passed. One day, I was walking to the supermarket. I was 26 at this point, having a smoke, and who should I bump into? C. There was a shocked look of incredulity on his face as he tried to figure out who he thought I was. He asked me, and I told him I was exactly who he thought I was. What followed was the most honest and sincere apology I've ever heard in my life. I will remember that apology for the rest of my life. He could have just pretended he didn't notice me, but he stopped me and he apologized. There was a legitimate shame in this man's voice for the things he'd done to me in the past. I forgave him instantly. I carried resentment towards him around for so many years, and in a second, it was gone. I was completely blindsided. That day, I regained a bit of my faith in humanity, and I had a fantastic rest of my day.
Wow.
That
could be emotional. And it was a simple description of what happened, but I feel like there's a lot more going on under the surface than just
right.
Oh, he apologized and I accepted, and there's a lot more going on between the lines there.
Yeah, right. Before we go and dive into this topic, because it is a very deep topic, specifically with bullying and getting past that, because that is such a huge issue that so many people, I feel like, deal with. We're just going to read the next Reddit story just because it's a little shorter and it definitely hits the same points, but it's got a very interesting twist to it. This one comes from the Reddit thread Heartwarming, which I don't believe I've shared on here before, but it's a really good thread. I know I say that about all of them, but these are all really, really good threads. But this one, similar title. This one is People Can Change. And the story
no period though?
No period this time, but
right.
People can change.
Less formal. All right.
This one says, a girl used to bully me 7 years ago back in school and made my life hell. I've changed a lot since then, and I matched her on Tinder 14 months ago. Obviously, she didn't recognize me at first. But turns out, people can change because we're married now, and I've never loved anyone as much as her. And someone commented, that is freaking awesome. Congrats to her for becoming a better person, and congrats to you for finding your life love and being able to forgive.
Wow, that's wild. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, again, I love that the comment there acknowledges that, yeah, kudos to her for becoming a better person, but even more, in my opinion, even more so is for this OP, for being able to get past what had happened and being able to move forward and view it as she's a new person. People change and they become different people throughout their lives, and putting that past enough that they were able to get married, that's I mean, that's wild. I don't think that's, a very common experience, obviously, but I just thought that was so powerful that you can change that much and you can have that much forgiveness to be able to get to a point like that with someone.
I mean, to a certain extent, like, especially talking about like when you're in like grade school or whatever versus like into adulthood, like you can almost to a certain extent have somewhat of a dissociation because like you are a completely different person than when you're younger. Yeah, obviously there are some like through lines that carried through, but like there's just looking at myself, there's so many ways I'm different than when I was a kid. Sometimes I want to smack that kid across the head and be like, oh my gosh, calm down, your life is fine. Like even looking back, like I've always talked about like I felt like I was bullied growing up, but like when I hear that story, like the first one, I'm like, okay, I didn't have it that bad. No one tried breaking my arm. Like I was just teased a lot,
And the fact that the person in the first story was able to that quickly forgive, I feel like just seeing the fact that that person that had bullied them took that moment to actually apologize genuinely and to show their remorse for what they had done and not just walk away and pretend they didn't see them. I think that was such an eye-opener for that person that, wow, people really can change. And the fact that they were able to, in that moment, forgive them so quickly. Again, kudos to the OP, because there are, I think, a lot of people that struggle with that they just can't get past the anger that they hold on to. But I love that moment where they said that they had carried resentment towards that person for so many years, and in a second, it was gone. And that they had a fantastic rest of their day. Because it is almost like you don't realize it, but by holding on to that anger and that resentment that you have towards someone that wronged you in the past, it's almost like carrying a huge weight on your shoulder. And over time, you kind of forget the weight is there, but it's still there. And then when you're finally able to let go of it and release it and forgive, you do notice it. Wow, suddenly I can stand up straighter. The weight is just gone. I didn't realize I had a weight there that was holding me down and making it harder to be happy. And that doesn't mean that you necessarily forget, obviously, the things that happened. Forgiving and forgetting are two different things for sure. And you don't have to forget what was done to you or what happened. But to be able to forgive and let go and just choosing for yourself to let go of that anger can help yourself be happier in the long run. It's not doing a favor for the person. It's doing a favor. I mean, it might be to some degree, but you're also doing it to yourself, because by letting go of that anger, it doesn't eat you on the inside anymore. And you're letting go of that weight that you've been carrying with you that you might not realize has been there all these years.
And it's one of the hard parts of life, especially when you're younger, is that like accepting that like you're not just the hero of your own story. Like everyone's got their own perceptions and their own things going on in their life, Like I feel like a common trope is like people who are perceived to be bullies and stuff in school, like there's a reasoning behind it, even though it's not correct. Like it's coming from they're having like a troubled home or external life outside of the situation where they're bullying you, like, and that's like their only means of like feeling like they have control or X, Y, or Z. There's so many different like you're only limited to your own perspective, and so you don't know like what they've gone through in the last like decades. Maybe they've realized the wrongs that they've done, or they always knew it was wrong, but they kept doing it anyways. Maybe they'd gone to therapy, or maybe they just had time to reflect on it. You don't know. I have to say though, that first story's giving Zootopia a little bit.
Yeah.
Without spoiling it too much, there's a scene that's very similar to that. I know that's a movie and it's an animated movie, but like sometimes there's things that relate, and like the way that character, the bully, had like talked in that scene, movie's version of that scene. Kind of gave, I've seen some people like kind of point out like gives therapy talk a little bit, the way that they approached and talked about it. Maybe that was the case here too. Maybe they'd gone through some therapy, or like maybe just had that much self-reflection to be able to like, oh yeah, that was wrong because of this and this and this, and so I'm sorry,
And you don't know how much that's weighed on them all these years too, of like you've been holding on to this resentment. That person might have held on to guilt for that however many years. And so to be able to get that off their chest and be able to actually apologize and get that out and not just have it hidden under the surface, this memory of what they did all those years ago,
Or maybe they didn't realize they were being mean at the time, Maybe they thought that it was them being funny and they just didn't fail to grasp that you weren't in on the joke, or I don't know. I don't know.
There's different levels, of course, of bullying and different levels of wrongdoing that, going back to what you were talking about, hurt people, right?
Right.
And so doesn't make it right, obviously. But if you can kind of approach it from a perspective of sadness rather than a perspective of hate, when you look back at these things, it can definitely help with the forgiving process. It's really, really hard to do. And I've definitely struggled with this in my life at times too, but being able to look at it more objectively rather than putting yourself in it and say, okay, I don't know what this, like what, going back to what you were saying, why I don't know what this person went through. I don't know their story. And it's very possible that that bully that was making fun of me was doing it out of their own insecurities, or they were maybe having bad situations at home I don't know about, or whatever. Like, again, because sometimes hurt people, we don't know. And so coming at it from a perspective of sadness and like, okay, well, what was going on in their life that they thought that was okay? So going at it from a perspective of sadness rather than a perspective of this person at their core is just terrible, I think can sometimes help to alleviate that anger and that just hate, and maybe start to kind of, and that can go forward with like non-bullying stuff too. For example, there might be an issue that you have a very hard stance on, and seeing somebody vocalize very vehemently against what you believe or something like that, coming at it from a perspective of, okay, well, why do they think that way? Instead of immediately going towards hate or feeling angry about it, can sometimes help to not harbor angry feelings in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And no matter what, even if it, I don't know, say take an example where they actually were just being mean, and they knew what they were doing, and they were just being mean to you, and there's not really any way to like, they're not feeling resentful about it, they're not apologizing to you, like they're still, it's only at that point now that you're removed from the situation, they're not harming you anymore. There comes a point where it's only harming you, and it's not
to hold on to that
anger.
Yeah,
it's not harming anybody else. So like, just for your own sake, not even for the
Right.
sake of the other person, to like forgive and to move on. Doesn't mean forget, but
to let go of it, not hang on to it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, going back to that whole sadness rather than hate, to put in perspective, if there's something that someone did that was really terrible to you or someone you know, if they're going through their life like that, that person, that's going to catch up with them eventually. That's just how life works. If they're treating people not well and they're not being kind to people, they're probably not going to make many good connections with people, and they're probably going to have a rough life, you know, in the long run. So looking at it from they're making their own choices and that's going to catch up with them, but I don't need to let that affect me. And looking at it from sadness for them rather than hate, I feel like can help in that process of letting it go for yourself and not harboring that anger and resentment towards that person, because it's their life. If they're going to make those choices, you just choose to not have that person in your life if they're causing that pain or acting that way towards you. But then it's their life and not yours. And then it's just your choice then of how you deal with the feelings surrounding it, which is maybe you go to therapy and have someone to be able to talk about that stuff and be able to let it go a little easier, or whatever it is, or talk about it with someone that you know so you can start letting go of those feelings. Or journal it. That can help a lot too, is writing down your feelings about it and then crumpling it up and throwing it away, you know? There's lots of ways you can do that that can help you to let go of that load of anger that you have towards anyone in your life. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But back to that couple, though, I'd love to hear. I could just have a conversation with them about like, tell them, what's your story, like, that's got to be fascinating, like how that all went down. Obviously, it's between them two, but that's just interesting.
Yeah, that's just a testament to, you know.
I feel like that happens
People
more
can
often than
change.
we think out there.
I mean, it could. You never know. So going off of that, we're going to go to a very heavy topic, but I feel like it's incredibly moving, and I came across it and I couldn't help. I read the entire article. It's a very long article, but it's really, really, it's something. The title of this article is "He Killed My Sister, Now I See His Remorse. The Extraordinary Stories of Survivors of the Rwandan Genocide Who Forgave Their Attackers." So for some context to this article, a man named Dick Wittenberg and a photographer named Jan Banning went to Rwanda for a month and traveled throughout it to find pairs of people to interview that were once enemies during the time of the genocide and who are now friends through a really amazing therapy that was done in Rwanda for several years. So essentially, there was a Dutch sociotherapist named Cora Decker that created a sociotherapy, it's called, where they have people go through this program essentially to talk through their traumas of things that have happened. Apparently, this kind of therapy has been used for like treating military personnel and asylum seekers. In Rwanda, it's known as, I apologize if I say this wrong, Mivira Inconvir, which means I heal you, you heal me. And apparently 64,000 Rwandans have gone through this therapy. It's a 7-week course, and they pair people within their own village or neighborhood to go through it together. And it's 15 weekly 3-hour sessions. They have different purposes to each session. So, for example, in the first few sessions, they try to do some like games and dancing and singing to kind of keep the atmosphere light. Obviously, it's a very heavy program to go through because you're sitting next to people that might have harmed your family in the past because of what happened, or people that have had that happen to them within this program. So it's a very difficult thing to go through, but they try to kind of help the group feel like a group, even though they're all these people that are basically enemies. And then after that, they kind of go through some discussions of trust and talking about how to foster trust, what inspires trust. From there, they start talking about care and respect. And then the last few sessions are about moving towards the future rather than the past and how they can move forward from what happened. So to quote the article, Emmanuel Sarabwe, who's a trainer and researcher at CBS Rwanda, says, "Every word, every gesture can be the spark that leads to closeness and healing contact in the group." Sarabwe says, "It helps if perpetrators show genuine remorse and awareness of what they have done and what pain they have caused. The group listens carefully and one statement recurs: they have suffered too." What's crazy is that the article says after the course is ended, 80% of the groups continue to meet because they have formed that bond through going through the therapy together. The article I went through, again, it's a very long article. I highly, highly recommend reading through it because there's some really fascinating firsthand accounts of people that have gone through this therapy. I think what's so interesting about this format of this article is they have a photo of a pairing of two people, and it's one that was a perpetrator and then the person that was the victim in that situation. And they talk about their experiences now having gone through the therapy with each other as a pair. Yeah, so there's some really interesting perspectives. I'm just going to read a few quotes that I thought stuck out to me as very impactful. In one of them, a person named Celestin says, "I spent 21 years in prison. I confessed. It didn't reduce my sentence, but it lightened my conscience. I still don't understand that I killed neighbors. Since sociotherapy, Clever, the person they were paired with, and I treat each other like brothers. It feels like grace." So they were able to move past it enough that they are, again, they treat each other like brothers and like they are friends, which I think is just amazing. Another pairing was someone named Mariana and a person named Mark. Mariana said, "This man killed my eldest sister," referring to Mark. "In sociotherapy, I could forgive him. I saw his remorse." And Mark, when interviewed, said, "I spent 6 years and 9 months in prison. After my release, I couldn't face Mariana. At first, I barricaded myself in my house. Later, I went to work elsewhere. Occasionally, I returned to my family. Mariana told my wife I no longer needed to flee. I was convinced it was a trap. She brewed banana beer and offered me a bottle. I refused. I was afraid she wanted to poison me. But she lent us money. She saw how poor our family was, and she gave me jobs. The woman whose sister I killed kept me alive." Yeah.
I just, man, like, I don't even know what to say. Like, that's so, it's heavy. Obviously,
Yeah.
like, this is, like, the positive, like, aftermath of, like, trying to, like, find forgiveness and peace for what happened. But, man, that's at like if you're not familiar with the Rwandan genocide, like,
Yeah, to give some, like a brief perspective, we're not going to go into too many details. We want this to overtly be a positive podcast, so we don't want to dwell on the details. But to put in perspective, 500,000 people died in 100 days, according to the article. And it was like neighbors against neighbors.
Yeah, which is terrifying as heck.
Because it was an entire group of people were targeted during this genocide. And it was quite a terrible, terrible, terrible time in history. Again, super, super heavy, but I feel like it's important in this podcast that we don't shy away from these tragedies or from things that are negative in our history or in our day-to-day lives, because I think it's so important to acknowledge the negative that does happen, because ignoring it does no good. We're just fooling ourselves then if we think that everything is just positive and uplifting and happiness all the time. But what amazes me about this article in particular, and a lot of these stories that come from really hard places to really hear about or to read, is that because of the situation that was so terrible, these people were able to demonstrate such amazing forgiveness and moving past horrible things that happened to make a more positive future, hopefully. And I think that's such an amazing thing. One comment here again, going forward in the story, someone said, a person named Vedost, I believe that's how it's pronounced, said, "This man destroyed our house back then. He has expressed deep regret. It felt good to feel my scorching anger dissipate. For years, my head was on the verge of exploding." The person that Vedost is referring to, Ildefono, I think that's how you pronounce it, he said, "Being welcomed by the man I wronged gives me hope." And so just to see that again, example of Vedas said that they had this scorching anger for years and that it felt good to finally get rid of it after all that time. And that therapy, that sociotherapy program really seemed to help them to be able to release that by seeing the regret that this person had and being able to have those apologies and be able to move forward and not look just at the past with anger, but instead to move forward. I mean, to take it to this next step where a lot of these people ended up becoming friends is mind-blowing to me. But I mean, wow, that's incredible too.
Yeah, we've just talking about like bullying before, and like this, I don't know, this makes marrying your bully or you're marrying your bully way more realistic. Like, geez, like I can't even like imagine. I mean, but at the same time as well, like without this, how do you like have a functioning society, you know? Because
right.
like, I mean, it's weird to think of, like, because I've heard, like, obviously like was aware of this, what happened and stuff, and like learned about it in school. And it's weird to think about. I don't really we ever talked about or even thought about, like, okay, what happened there afterwards?
Right.
You know, like what after the situation, like the immediate situation resolved, like there's still like people are still living there, unless they all moved away, which didn't sound like they did. How are you gonna like come to a place just to be able to like function, like beyond like forgiveness is good for yourself and like as we talked about before, but like to have like to feel safe again in your community? Like how do you feel safe again in your community?
Because it's not like you can hide from these people, you know, they're all around. I mean, it was a mass thing. I mean, 500,000 people, that's everybody, you know, like, I mean, that's everybody was affected in some way, you know, so you're facing people that every day, there's no avoiding it, that were a part of it in some fashion, you know, whether victim or perpetrator. So to be able to get past that trauma. Another one, again, this, I'm like barely scratching the surface with these quotes. There's some, I mean, I highlighted so many, and I'm only going to go through like a fraction of even the moments that I highlighted. So again, please check out this article if you have the time. It's so impactful. But this one I was surprised by. So a person named Pascal wrote, "That man," and refers to the person they paired with, Raphael, "that man confessed everything and showed remorse. Still, I didn't trust him. It was only in therapy that I saw he had truly changed." And then Raphael said, "Who would have thought that we'd ever drink banana beer together? Nowadays, we're even family. My son married the daughter of his uncle."
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So to see that, like, that they were able to move forward enough for that is just, again, mind-blowing and really honestly inspiring, that after something of that magnitude, if they can forgive people that literally killed their neighbors or their sisters or their brothers or whatever, and to be able to move past that and even become friends, it really puts things into perspective of people that maybe you've held on to some anger or feelings of that aren't positive towards, that maybe it's better to forgive and let go, you know? Because if they can do it, then we should definitely be able to, you know? And that doesn't mean, again, you don't have to forget and you don't have to make that person a part of your life. People have referenced in this article and the ones before, it definitely makes a huge difference to let go of that anger for yourself. It's doing yourself a favor in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And ultimately, forgiveness is your choice. Like, no one can take 100%. That from you. No one is saying you have to forgive. I think you should at some point, but forgiveness is not a linear.
It's a journey.
It's not a linear journey either.
Right.
Like,
yeah, it's different for everybody.
And I imagine it won't be for them either. Like, even if they are like friends now, I imagine it's still like,
oh yeah,
they're gonna be talking about it forever.
Very interesting relationship. Again, I apologize for bringing something this heavy on the podcast, but I do think it is very important to acknowledge the negative, because that's where we get to see these bright examples of hope for humanity and inspiring stories of forgiveness and of whatever it may be that we talk about on this podcast.
Oh man, that's such a heavy story, but again, like a positive story coming out of it, Yeah.
Just to put it out there, just because we say like a positive story doesn't mean that everything in it has to be overtly positive. If you have a story and there is some dark, but then it leads to something light, please share it. That is something that we would definitely still want to share on this podcast. And we would love to hear your stories. You can submit them at upliftingpositivestories@gmail.com, or you can join our Facebook group at Uplifting Positive Stories, and you can anonymously share stories on there. We may end up using it on a future podcast episode. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode, and we hope you'll tune in next week on Wednesday. Have a wonderful rest of your week.
And stay positive.